goddesses and gods.
Yeah, they listen.
Yes, they are
than I am.
That's that formula the state uses, the difference between secondary, the state is supposed to fund secondary at 1.2 and then elementary at 1, right? That's a constant, that's just puts people against each other.
Yes.
Because that's a huge issue for high schools.
Kindergarten was even less than the elementary.
Yeah, I know.
That killed me.
But that causes a huge conflict when we have these conversations,
Yeah.
because I'm going like, we're supposed to be 1.2. I would have the $300,000 I need if we just funded it the way the state tells you supposed to fund it. The district doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So St. Paul's been pretty even across the board, which that's fine. In other ways, it's like, but there's certain expenses that I'm running in a secondary school that don't exist in an elementary school. So that's
I guess
but it causes arguments.
My point just is like the whole thing has shifted, and so like it's not just about teachers need to just make a few dollars and love their children, but that they are worth something to society. Like that there's something about teaching and education that is valued as a skill and as a profession, and that like an acknowledgement that I like my teacher, so all like there's an expansion of that idea that. It's not, other teachers might be bad, but mine I love. Like people are starting to go, okay, like there's a problem.
I would say absolutely national movement. The bargaining team at St. Paul went to the American Federation of Teachers in 2010 to be trained in bargaining for the common good. And so we were there with other locals from around the country, so I would say absolutely. And I also think that, the national movement begs the question, what is the purpose of public education? And I think that, if we look at some of the legislation that we have, like world's greatest workforce, is public education to create workers? And if so, does that mean that we're commoditizing our students, which I think we are? And I don't ever hear any kind of conversation around that. What is the purpose of public education? And I think that if we were clear on that, then the issues of funding and the issues of placing a numerical value on a teacher, right, might be a little bit different, but it goes back to our capitalist roots, right? That everything has to have some kind of a monetary value.
There's also a conversation about, thinking about what is it that is the purpose of school, and what is the school supposed to do? What is the school's responsibility in a community? And we have taken, and this is, and I think the common good stuff is really interesting, but I think it's also problematical in some ways, because it's basically saying the rest of society doesn't have to care about these kids because we're going to give them all the counseling they need, we're going to give them mental health services they need, we're going to give them the nursing services they need in our school. That does not happen in Finland, for instance, currently held up as the best education system in the world for many, many reasons. They have all those services in their society, in their community, but the school's responsibility is not that. The school's responsibility is, we're going to teach you how to think.
But the reason why we're negotiating that isn't because we think it belongs in the school, it's because people put it there, right?
Exactly.
So they keep telling us, you got to do this and this and this and this, so we're like, okay, fine.
That's kind of what I meant. It's like,
then give us the resources,
Yeah, so I think the focus, one of our issues, in particular in high school education, is we are totally unfocused. We're trying to do everything for everybody, and we're doing it half-assed, all of it. Even the academic part. I mean, I got wonderful teachers, but we're just not, the kids aren't, I get really scared when I go to a Macalester event, because we're a host family for international students at Mac. Those kids are amazing. I mean, some of you might be some of them, but like 4 languages, and you know what I'm saying? And I get really scared for my students at Johnson because we cannot compete. They don't understand what that kind of competition is in terms of intellectual engagement and cognitive practice. And part of that is because our mission is so spread out. We're so scattered. So, and I'm not trying to make a bunch of scholastic automatons, but some of that is like, okay, what are we trying to do here? And the Europeans, I taught in Norway for a year, several years ago, and they do not do that. School is school, and 1 block away is all the services you need.
So I think building off what you you say what you were saying, and I'm somewhat radical in my life.
She always was.
But this country has not dealt with the issue of poverty since the 1960s.
Well, that's true.
And it is, as Kimberly said, it is falling on the backs of educators, which causes us to be scattered. And so I would argue we're in like a second Gilded Age, but we have a huge wealth divide, and I think I just saw the other day it's like 44% of American workers are on $15 an hour or less. And that is very problematic for our education system of who we're producing as students, how they compete not just nationally but internationally. And poverty, I think, is a huge driving factor of what we're trying to fix in our schools, but again, is that our role as educators?
Well, and the other side of that is race, right? School was never made for people of color, depending on which ethnic group that you're from. So let's talk about people who are enslaved. School was never made for us. And so when you're talking about all of that, you have to take that into consideration. And, you know, we look at Europe, but we also need to look at other cultures as well, right? When we think about education. And so it's great to hold up Finland, but we also need to hold up other cultures, because we come from families that have different ways of knowing and learning that are all equally as good, just different. And so how do we figure out how to meet the needs of a lot of different students? I will say that the corporate culture that we have now for our public schools is definitely not the way, right? Like, as a person of color, if we're gonna go to Finland, I would rather go to Finland than do the corporate stuff that we're doing right now. Because we pay a ton of money for testing, we pay a ton of money for shit that we actually don't really need.
True.
And you know, we can make those decisions not to do that. We do need a few tests, but we don't need the tests that we have now. When y'all become teachers, right, you're gonna have to take a ton of tests that are expensive. We don't need all those tests. You don't need all those tests. You don't need basic skills. If you got into college, you have basic skills, right? Okay, maybe we need to do a little testing on your, you know, the content area for pedagogy or something like that. But do we need to pay Pearson to do that? You know, and I got some stories about Pearson and sitting in on something. I've been traumatized by that. I won't get into it. So I think that you're right, and we have to really, really think about the culture of American public education. And
I think the education research supports this. Do you have Boyles and Gintis here?
Sure.
Schooling in Capitalist America.
Oh, sure.
Like, it's a very famous study from the 60s. They read it in the 80s. If you come from a suburban, middle class, corporate family, you are taught to be managers. Your opportunities in school are taught to be creative problem solvers. You are taught to be thinkers and to do projects that need a lot of hands-on.
It's called the St. Paul Academy.
Yes, yes. If you come from a blue-collar neighborhood, a more traditional factory, you are taught to kind of be in the middle, that maybe you'll be middle management, but you still need a lot of rote memorization skills. But if you come from a very poor neighborhood, you are taught to be managed. And that is shown through education research over and over again, that you are taught to be a worker of an hourly employment type of task-based job.
Or not even the work, sorry. Not in thinking of race too. In
Yeah.
terms of not even a worker. And if you are like exploited worker, because we know our schools are connected to incarceration rates disproportionately of Black and brown students. So even just an exploited person or incarcerated person.
yeah.